testament to the reality of our academic lives, which is how prevalent rejection, setbacks are in this sometimes very rewarding but also very tough field. So, guys, I've just asked everybody to take a little moment before we kick off to just think about something that you do that is helpful when you in your mind. It doesn't have to be helpful to other people, but you find it helpful. When you get a rejection, might be a paper that gets rejected, it might be an idea, a grant, or something like that. What's one helpful thing that you do? And if you feel comfortable to share, what's one unhelpful thing that you do? And you may see some of us have already shared some of the unhelpful things that we do. So yes, thank you so much for the big swear. I think that's a great one. And certainly have experienced that one before. Drink, yes, that's another one. So thank you guys for sharing those comments. And Annika will share some of those with you later as we get going. So what we're going to do now, guys, I'm going to kick off. So our session today is all about this topic of rejection. I get knocked down, but I get up again, and how we deal with those sorts of rejections. So as usual, I'd like to just remind everyone about our womeninresearch.org.au website, where we have lots of wonderful interviews with laureates, but also lots of evidence-based advice on career-related topics. Also, all of the past webinars in this series, if this is the first time that you have joined us. Just a couple of things before we get going, and I might just talk to you so you can see my face. And I'll put the slides back up again in a minute. But first of all, I'd like to acknowledge today that we are on the land of the Whadjuk people of the Noongar Nation here in Western Australia. And I pay my respects and acknowledge elders past, present and emerging. So welcome everyone. Today we're going to talk about rejection. And, I was actually thinking about this topic as I rode my bike to work this morning. And just as I left, my husband said to me, "Are you sure you want to ride? Because it's a bit rainy here at the moment." And I was like, no, the sun's shining. It's beautiful. I'm going to ride. So off I went on my bike, beautiful sun shining. And then 10 minutes later, the rain started. And then 15 minutes later, the sort of almost cyclonic wind started. And I was thinking, oh my goodness. But it sort of made me think a little bit about this topic. We start off with our beautiful paper and we love it and we're happy with it and the sun is shining. And then, of course, we submit it and, we get criticised and rejected. And, it's like those howling winds and torrential rain is hitting us. But somehow or other, we have to keep going. And that's really what today is about. How do we keep going when those howling winds and rain are knocking us off our bike, off our journey? So that's what we're going to focus on today. And I'm absolutely delighted that we will have with us a little bit later ARC Laureate Fellow Sarah Dolnikar, who is one of our most popular, yes, she's waving to you. She is one of our most popular Laureate Fellows to join the session. And I'm sure is part of the reason we have, such a wonderful attendance today. So I'm going to just start today with a bit of an overview of some of the evidence on this topic, because those of you who know the series know that we really love to share personal experience and tips, but it's also, yes, and Caroline, you know what I'm talking about with the wind and rain in WA. That's what I was experiencing today. So I like to sort of start with a little bit of what do we know from the literature about this topic? And then we will also share our experiences along the way. So what this slide shows is a review of the literature on resilience. So what is resilience? Resilience is usually defined as, in essence, the ability to bounce back from adversity or setbacks. So it's not, resilience doesn't mean never having problems, but it means when you do have those problems, those challenges, those issues, you're able to keep riding your bike, you're able to bounce back and keep going. So what this overview figure here shows is all of the evidence about the outcomes, first of all, of having resilience, and you can see all sorts of great things there: performance, career success, job satisfaction, better mental health, and better, more positive responses to change, and so on. So resilience, and yes, the slides, Dori, we always put the slides up on the website, as well as their presentation, so you can access them. So great things come from resilience, but what is it that drives resilience? And what you can see there in the slide are groups of factors. So the first thing is that there are some personality factors that make a difference. We're not even going to talk about them because actually, you know, your personality is your personality. It's a bit hard to change. But let's talk about personal resources. So things like expertise, self-efficacy, these sorts of things really make a difference to your ability to bounce back. And let me give you a personal example. So, you know, I put an envelope there to remind myself to share with you, you know, when I used to get rejections, and Sarah, you're probably younger than me, so this may be even going back further than you, but I used to get them in the form of a letter, actually, you know, so we don't get that anymore. You just get them, of course, on the internet. But, you know, once upon a time, you submit your paper and then you'd wait for the letter and you'd get this envelope and it'd be really thick and you'd be thinking like, oh my gosh, is that good or bad news? And I know what I always used to do is I'd get that envelope, you'd see that it had come from America, which is mostly where we were trying to publish in those days. And, you know, what I would literally do is I would go straight to my office and lock the door. And I locked the door because, you know, if I was going to cry, I didn't want anyone coming in and finding me. So then I would open the envelope when I felt that I could react in private. And I was reflecting on that actually today, you know, and these days, let me say, when I barely have an emotion when I get a paper rejection. And that's a slight exaggeration in the sense of I might feel a bit annoyed, or I might feel a bit frustrated, but I never, ever want to cry anymore. And why is that? Partly because I've built up those personal resources that are the sorts of things that are indicated there. First of all, I've got the expertise. I know, having done this for so long, I know that if we respond, if we change things, if we, you know, yes, crying is a very natural response. But, you know, I know now what I need to do to get a paper published. So that expertise is built up, that self-efficacy, that self-confidence is built up. I think also, you know, and I'm going to share with you more of this today, I've learned how to think about these things. I've learned how to reflect on these things in a healthier way. And that's what I'm going to share a bit more around today. You can see in that third box there, things like if you have a strong sense of purpose and meaning, or, you know, strong commitment to your work, it can make dealing with rejection a little bit easier and being resilient in a sense, because sometimes you've got that sense of, you know, I believe in this work and I know I'm really committed to it. So, okay, these people don't like it, but I'm willing to you know, keep persisting because you've got that strong sense of calling or commitment to your work. So that can certainly help. And then that final box down in the bottom of this slide here, work resources and demands. Yes, no, the screen hasn't frozen. I just haven't moved it on yet because I'm still talking about this first slide, is the importance of the climate and the work that you're in. So do you have a supportive leader? Do you have support from your colleagues? You know, do you have a positive context where people hold you up a little bit when you experience this sort of rejection? And we'll talk more about that as we go forward today. So we're not saying this is all about you as an individual. It is partly the environment that you're in that matters as well. So I want to be clear, though. I've just shared with you that these days a paper rejection, I barely get an emotion. I might get a little bit of an emotion, but not much. But I do want to be very clear. There are other rejections that I experience where I have very strong emotions, and I will give an example of that as we do. So all I'm sort of saying is that perhaps what I get the strong reactions to has shifted over time as a result of my learning. So let's go on to the next slide. And this is actually a meta-analysis of interventions. I always like to look at the evidence around what do we know actually works. So in other words, these are studies that have looked at how can we make people more resilient? What sort of interventions would actually enhance people's resilience if it's low? And what this analysis shows is that mindfulness and cognitive behavioural interventions can matter. And in fact, I'm going to delve into that a bit more today. Psychoeducation interventions can work, which is sort of more not teaching people the skills of mindfulness, but and cognitive behavioural stuff, but sharing what those things are and why they matter. Social support interventions was one of the areas where the evidence is strongest. In other words, social support is really important if you are wanting to be resilient. So that's something to keep top of mind. Actually, physical activity interventions can make a difference too. So, actually engaging in physical activity can be helpful. What I want to talk about in the next 10 minutes, though, I want to just delve a little bit into this area of mindfulness and cognitive behaviour. In 10 minutes, I cannot do justice to literally hundreds of years of research on these topics. I just want to give a little bit of a taste for people who are maybe not familiar with some of these ideas, but also some resources so that if this does interest you, you've got the opportunity to go a little bit deeper into this. So the first, and really what these ideas of mindfulness and cognitive behavioural therapy are all about are recognising that when we have a setback or a failure, we have strong emotions, and they might be feeling like a failure or feeling hopeless, anxiety, can I do this job? Have I got what it takes? Shame, fear, all sorts of anger, all sorts of emotions. And if we don't work out ways of managing these emotions, then there can be some negative consequences. And that's what I want to talk about. What are some ways we can manage these emotions? Not about not having emotions. It's about how we deal with them. If we don't manage our emotions, of course, poor mental health and impaired well-being is a consequence. So, if we, for example, get really caught up in anxiety and feeling like a failure and questioning whether we can do this, and that rumination continues, then that can really lead into poorer mental health, depression, and more chronic forms of anxiety. I think another response that can happen if we don't reflect on and manage our emotions effectively is almost avoidance or quitting or giving up. So, and look, sometimes that can be an adaptive strategy, and I know we'll talk about that later as well, but sometimes we're giving up for the wrong reasons because we don't want to experience these emotions again. So that can be an outcome of not handling our emotions effectively. Another one can be conflict. If we're angry, we might be lashing out, we might be writing the editor a really inappropriate letter, or we might be arguing with colleagues, or we might be fighting with our spouse or whatever. But sometimes that can be an unhelpful response. And then another consequence of not handling the emotions that we experience well is rigidity. So there's this theory called threat rigidity. And what that shows is that if people experience what they feel is a threat And a rejection can be very threatening, right? Because it can raise feelings like, am I good enough to do this job? You know, and that can generate a lot of anxiety. And threat rigidity means that sometimes when people feel like a situation is threatening for them, and they have a lot of anxiety as a result, what happens is that they then become more rigid and narrow in their thinking. So they stop exploring ideas, they sort of bunker down almost, and become more narrow and inflexible in the way that they think about things. And if you think about it in the face of a rejection, that's not necessarily helpful, because often you do need to you need to look at the comments. You need to take on board some of the feedback sometimes. Sometimes you can ignore it, but sometimes you do need to take it on board. So rigidity can be an unhelpful response. So what do we do instead? And one of the questions that came through prior to the session is, you know, I'd love strategies on not taking the rejections personally, how to stop comparing rejections with the success of others, and how to reframe them positively. So, so we experience these emotions. What can we do? So the first thing is allowing yourself. Actually, I think yes. Oh, sorry, I forgot. I did these slides very last minute. So what I'm going to recommend here is, and this comes from a nice paper that I'll share with you about the idea of going to your emotions instead of sitting on them. So sitting on your emotions means you're trying to squash them, right? You're trying to eradicate them. You're trying to not have them. You're trying to suppress them. And most psychological research would suggest that's not a healthy strategy. It might manifest later in drinking too much or other sorts of things. Suppressing your emotions is not helpful. Instead, it's okay to have these negative emotions, sit with them, not on them. And it can help to sort of label your emotions. So, and ideally, you would label your feelings, your thoughts in a way that you diffuse from them. And what that means is not getting so tangled up in your emotions that they become you. So the example might be here, I'm having the feeling that I'm depressed. Instead of thinking I'm depressed, I'm having the feeling that I'm depressed. So you're recognizing you're having this feeling, this emotion, but you're not completely so entangled in it that you can't separate yourself from it. So what is the emotion? So it's when you experience these rejections, experience your emotions, feel them, think about them, label them. And that can be a really helpful way of going to your emotions. The second thing is taking time to process your emotions and reflect on them non-judgmentally. So it can help to write about your emotions. It can certainly help to share them with someone else. But what we're talking about here is being compassionate to yourself. And that is super important. So I think many of you and some of you shared already, I can see in the chat, you know, we have these feelings of I'm a failure, I'm useless, I should give up, or I'm not good enough. So just sitting with those emotions, writing about them, can help you to separate yourself a little bit from those feelings. So going to your emotions instead of trying to sit on them and squash them. The second thing that's really helpful, and really I'm talking about mindfulness ideas here, and that's why I said we can't do mindfulness in 10 minutes. But if these ideas are resonating with you, I've got some resources at the end that I encourage you to explore. So the second thing is, so first of all, going to your emotions is recognizing that you've got emotions, labeling them, reflecting on them. But the second thing is going through the emotions, which really means sort of recognizing you've got your emotions, but keeping on going. So the idea here is if you allow yourself not to get so tangled up in your feelings that you can reflect, I'm having feelings of frustration and anger, you're able to more easily move on in the direction of things that are valuable to you. And I'm going to give you an example of this in a minute. So sometimes what happens is we get really caught up in focusing on whether our emotions are the right ones or correct or justified or reasonable. You know, I deserve to be upset about this, rather than whether they're helpful emotions. So I'll give you an example of my daughter. One of my daughters went through a very extreme health anxiety phase, a bit like the picture here. And so it was constantly thinking that she was dying, right? Because, you know, she'd have a sore throat. So she thinks she's, you know, she'll get on the internet and figure out that it could be throat cancer, et cetera, et cetera. And actually this concept of whether it was pointless debating with her about whether her belief that she would die was true or not, because there is actually a tiny possibility that my daughter with a sore throat does have throat cancer and she can die. So debating about whether it's true or not is sort of pointless, because it could be true, right? What we tried to focus on instead is it helpful? Is it a helpful thought or belief to think that your sore throat could be cancer? Or actually, is it sending you down a spiral of looking up on the internet, feeling you can't go out because you're worried? You know, is it? And so that's another way. So that's something we can think about. Not is it, am I right in being so angry and so justified at this rejection? But is that anger a helpful emotion for me? Is it actually helping me to move forward in terms of what I value? So have a little think about that. If you find yourself getting caught up on I deserve this, and we all do get those emotions, ask yourself, is it really helpful thinking this way? Might be true, but is it helpful? And is there a better way I could think about it? So there's this really nice idea that and this is a sort of fundamental premise of mindfulness thinking is, you know, that instead of battling with our emotions, what I'm suggesting to you is that you recognize that they're there. Sadness, shame, sometimes even when we have experienced big rejections, we can feel shame. Label them, step back from them, actually, in a way, is what I'm suggesting. And so there's this concept of being on the balcony, watching yourself, observing yourself and your emotions. It gives you a bit of distance from your emotions, and that gives you then flexibility to have different responses. But when we're all tangled up with our emotions, that's when we get stuck and we can't move forward. So I've put a video link here about this idea that comes from this mindfulness, or it's sometimes called acceptance and commitment therapy, of passengers on the bus. And the idea, and you can watch this video, is that, you know, if you're driving, you've got your bus that you're driving, and you pick up these passengers. And oh, thank you so much for putting that up on the chat. And there's lots of them, by the way. You can Google, you might find a different one. But you pick up these passengers, and they want to drive the bus. Some of your passengers want to go really fast and take you in a different direction, and some of you passengers want to, you know, stop the bus and get out. And these passengers are your thoughts and your feelings. And in a sense, you're the driver of your bus, and you're sort of going, hey, thanks, guys, for your feedback, but I'm going to keep driving the bus in the direction that you go. And so in a sense, this is what we're saying to our minds. Hey, yeah, thanks for the feedback. I know you think I'm useless, mind, but I'm going to keep going where I'm going. So this is, Russ Harris. Thank you, Naralee, for sharing that. I love Russ Harris. I think he's fantastic in this space. And I would recommend people, if you're finding that you just can't move on when you have rejection or any setback, and you get really caught up in your emotions and you're engaging in some of those unhelpful strategies that I suggest, you know, that we talked about before, rumination, which is sort of just completely getting caught up in your feelings, or denial, giving up, suppressing your feelings, but just, oh, I'm never going to submit a paper again. If you're engaging in those unhelpful responses, then have a look at some of this stuff about managing your emotions. That is really one of the most a monster on the bus, passenger on the bus, same sort of idea. So let me just read, and this is a really nice paper that I've put here. So again, if this stuff resonates, have a look at this paper. I'll just read it out for you. The objective of going to and going through unhelpful emotions is not to prevent or eradicate unpleasant thoughts and feelings. That won't happen because they're part of being human. Instead, the goal is to disentangle ourselves from distracting, unhelpful thoughts and feelings in order to refocus on more important and useful matters, such as maintaining positive relationships and acting in ways that enable progress in achieving our career objectives. So just take a little bit of time next time you're experiencing a rejection, a setback, to reflect on what you're feeling, name what you're feeling, and make sure that you are going to and going through those emotions rather than getting stuck with them. It can take time, and this will be the last comment I make before I introduce Sarah. So let me give a personal example. So I mentioned earlier that these days a rejection of a paper doesn't have much impact on me, but I still react strongly to rejection, but different sorts of rejection these days. So some of you may remember, you may have joined the Women in Research session, maybe it was end of 2022, when I found out that we didn't get our Centre of Excellence application after being shortlisted. So for those who don't know what this is, let me just say the application for the Centre of Excellence was 880 pages, and we got down to the final 17 centres that were in with a chance. 11 were selected, and we have it on very good authority that we were number 12. And I can tell you that was devastating. I can tell you that the way I found out was devastating. I was actually in Melbourne about to do one of these public lectures, and I got a call from the Deputy Vice Chancellor of Research, and I took the call because I knew it was going to be the news. And I was literally standing up at the stage ready to be introduced, and I got the news that we didn't get it. So then I had to do a 45-minute talk with some of the chief investigators that were on the grant sitting in front of me, and manage I had to suppress my emotions at that point. But then I had to deal with the rejection, and it was tough. And I vowed I would never try again. Okay, so this response of giving up, I think I was pretty burnt out and exhausted and devastated. So my point about it can take time. It took me honestly, it probably took me 6 months to get to the point where I could entertain the possibility of trying again. And we are trying again, and I may well get rejected again, but it feels right to try again because we had a good team, we got so close, and to not try again would have felt actually that I wasn't acting in accordance with my values. I probably will not try again. If this time we're unsuccessful, I'll probably call it a day. But I think it's the right thing to try again. But it wasn't an easy thing. It took me not just a few moments to process my emotions. It actually took me quite some months and some, talking and sharing. So I just wanted to share that story to be clear that whilst paper rejections these days are water off a duck's back for me, there are still other rejections that I face and that all of us, I'm sure, face that hurt and that invoke those negative emotions that we need to think about how we manage in order to act in accordance with our values, which basically means do what we think is right and important. So thank you, guys. On this note, I would love to introduce Sarah Dolnicker. And she is, and by the way, in the slides, I've put some resources. So I've put some links to different websites and so on and so forth. And so that'll all be available on our website. Oh, and just before I go to Sarah, I want to quote J.K. Rowling. Now, I know that J.K. Rowling has copped flack for various issues, but let's agree that she's an incredibly successful author. And I believe she was rejected by 12 publishers before the Harry Potter series was actually accepted. And she said, and I'll just read it out to you because I'm not sharing my slides, "It's impossible to live without failing at something unless you live so cautiously that you might as well have not lived at all, in which case you fail by default." So I think that's a really important comment. It's impossible to live without failing at something unless you live so cautiously that you might as well not have lived at all, in which case you fail by default. So ARC Laureate Fellow Professor Sarah Dolnicker is one of our most popular ARC laureates that we have on the session. She's amazing, a superstar, and I'm not going to go through her bio, it's on the web, but I'm going to hand you to Sarah to share some of her thoughts about this important topic. Over to you, Sarah.
Thank you very much, Sharon. Let me just see if I can make this screen share work.
Yes, that's
Can you
going
see
good.
this? Wonderful.
Yes.
I've given away too much because it's supposed to build up. So maybe before I start, because I promised you a model, so I developed a model, but I wanted to say that, I consider myself a master of failure. And actually, I think the older I get, not in terms of age, but the longer I'm in the business, the more if people ask me, what's the secret to success? It's actually the ability to fail. It really, for me, it totally is. So I think being able to fail is super important. And because you mentioned the Center of Excellence, I could tell you the last 18 months, I probably wrote 10 grants and I got none of them. And I went for a really massive 14 million European Union one. And they ranked us so bad that they locked on our CVs. They ranked us so bad, they locked us, preventing us from applying for 2 years. So, wow. It's just life. And I think the conversation we're having today is about what do you do with it? Can you cope with it over the longer period of time or not? All right, so my model, here's my model. Let's see. That's your average work. Yeah, so if you just kind of work along, that's how well or badly you produce. This is how you feel emotionally. Well, actually, I shouldn't say you. This is how I feel. So I've been in this business for 25 years, and I feel it's like an emotional roller coaster that oscillates between megalomania and inferiority complex, right? Barely any day do I feel average. I either feel like I'm the biggest genius on the planet, or I feel like I'm totally useless and I should just, find myself another job. So, once you realize that that's how you feel, you have to start disassembling where all these peaks and troughs come from and, how you manage them. So brilliant. I feel brilliant one day, hopeless, brilliant, hopeless. It's pretty emotionally exhausting, right? And I notice actually also different people are different at how they cope. I have colleagues who cannot cope. Like they will every time say, maybe I should change jobs. Yeah. And I think that's really dangerous because they are fundamentally unhappy with what they're doing. All right. So we're oscillating. And remember, you're always going to oscillate. Maybe Sharon is more mature than I am. I am by nature I'm not balanced by nature, right? So I will always oscillate until the end of my career. Good, but then I think that this kind of oscillation has different zones. So when I think about what's my share of this, I have kind of a range between poor and good work. And as Sharon said, you actually do know when you've produced good work and when you've produced poor work. If you don't see it in the moment, after a rejection and after a few weeks, you look at it again and sometimes you go, you know what, actually, it wasn't quite as brilliant as I thought. So I think if you can be your own harshest critic, you are quite capable to judge if a piece of your work is really outstanding for your standards or if it's actually on the weaker side. So this, I think, is kind of the realm of your responsibility. And that's also really important because a lot of the chat comments we saw is about, you know, the reviewers are having a bad day. All this, there's politics involved. There's this, there's this, there's this. But sometimes we forget that there's a very big realm of responsibility. So first and foremost, is this really the best work that I've produced? And sometimes even my best work obviously gets rejected. Or is it sometimes just genuinely not that genius? In which case, you've got to acknowledge it and you've got to deal with the rejection differently. Importantly, you know, within that realm of responsibility, I feel it's me. Yeah. So I think some days I do better work, some days I do worse work, but I'm never so hopeless. Okay. I'm never down there. I'm just never as hopeless as I sometimes feel, but I'm also never as brilliant as I sometimes feel. Yeah. And I think that's really, for me, that helps to conceptualize it, right? So I basically view it as a good luck zone on top and a bad luck zone at the bottom. All right. So I'm in my realm of responsibility. So what's in my control is to basically produce the best work I can, given my experience, talents, whatever, opportunities. But then I need to say, well, the fact that I didn't get that EU grant is not at all that I'm hopeless. And I've been ranked hopeless, right? Because they are blocking me from applying for 2 years. But I'm not hopeless. It was not my best work because I was under pressure. So I know how I can improve it, but I was not that hopeless. Yeah. So that makes it quite easy for me to say, all right, bad luck. And sometimes you get a phone call and they could tell you you're a laureate and you think, oh my God, you know, I'm just the bee's knees. But you're not that brilliant. That's just a day in your life and you just happen to be lucky one day, right? Because you got the right reviewers, you had the right committee. And there's a lot of people who are just as brilliant as you are and equally deserve that laureate. So that helps me. I oscillate all the time and I just need to separate out for me, where is it me? Because when it's me, it's also my responsibility to improve. And when is it stuff outside of my control, then I just need to kind of try to moderate my, sense of self-esteem or self-confidence to be a little bit more balanced. All right, that's the model. We can discuss that. But I thought I'd just share a few more things because that's kind of almost theoretical, although I just drew it up out of experience. But I thought, you know, how would you manage a work life? Because it is the way. Your work life as an academic is going to be defined by highs and lows. It's not like working in a post office, right? It's going to, every day of your life, it's going to be highs and lows. So I actually think pretty fundamentally, you've got to ask yourself, can you be happy in that environment? Because that's never going to change. So if you can't cope with highs and lows, can you do 40 years of that roller coaster without breaking? It's a really important question. Some people have the ability, others don't. And I think everyone's got to be asking themselves, is that me? Can I kind of do that? Already Sharon mentioned that you need to build self-confidence from enjoyment of your work and not from acceptances. Yeah, because if you depend on acceptances and successes, again, you will never have those roots that allow you to stand still no matter how the wind blows and the rain falls. So the self-confidence comes from, I'm doing really cool research. They didn't accept it, no problem. I am still doing really cool research and I'm enjoying the research I'm doing. Celebrate achievements, not metrics. That's my pet hate, right? Whenever I have an opportunity, I say, you should not post your impact factor of your journal. You should not post your H-index. You should not post your citations. I'm quite irritated by it because I think it sends an absolutely wrong signal. It gives people the impression that these things matter, but they don't. We have people with endlessly many citations. They stand for nothing. They have made absolutely no contributions. And we have people who have made a massive impact with brilliant ideas and their metrics are poor. So here it's the realm of our collective responsibility to ensure, you know, in many ways we are shooting ourselves in the foot. So if we play along with those games, we are judged by these metrics. So, you know, we need to boycott those metrics. Otherwise, life becomes more difficult for ourselves and our students and our postdocs. You need to assess the quality of your work critically, and that's actually easier said than done. So I see with a lot of my students, early students or early postdocs, more students, they get the reviewers' comments, and nothing is their fault, right? The reviewer didn't understand it, and this is stupid, and this is stupid. Well, actually, no. Actually, this reviewer has a very valid question. So your realm of responsibility, you've got to actually hold yourself accountable for, taking responsibility for that. Don't blame the reviewers, the system, the weather. It happens all the time. People say, oh, so I'm in tourism research, right? I mean, I'm trained in psychology and marketing, but most of what I do now is tourism research. Why do I do it? Because it's a very complex problem, right? Anyway, I won't go into this. But where did I get? Oh, yes. So a lot of tourism colleagues say you can never win an ARC grant in tourism. Yeah. Or people will say you can never publish in that journals if you do qualitative work. Yeah. And you'll never get promoted if you haven't done this and that. So I think we in academia are outstanding at developing paranoid theories about how everything's after us and how, it's not really in our control. And that's if it's right? If it's in your realm of luck or unluck, that's fine. But that's not the 100% story, right? So you've got to disassemble. Where is it really for you to improve, and where is it genuinely just bad luck because some reviewer didn't get it? So separate the quality of your work from luck. Have critical friends, because sometimes, and I mean critical friends, more in a European way, because I find that Australians are not super great at accepting criticism. So there's a lot of kind of really polite, oh, that's a great job, but maybe you could, I wonder if you could maybe. So in my group, we're quite blunt. Yeah, we give ourselves very harsh criticism, but not because we hate each other, because we want to push ourselves to become better. So even if you are blind to where you could improve, then you need to have critical friends who you trust enough that they will say, look, Sarah, this is really brilliant, but you have not explained it well. Or I don't get it, right? So sometimes your eyes don't see it anymore. Then you really need to have a few trusted friends who know you're not offended if they tell you what they really, really think. All right. And if your work is good, again, you need to judge that critically. You can't just a priori say all my work is good. But if your work is good, you just cannot give up. And that's, I think, the mastery of failure. So I'll finish with one story because the question time is my favorite bit. But so the Laureate Fellowship, I had a colleague at the previous university I worked at who I have immense respect for. And she once publicly stood up and talked about her experience. And she said, I got my laureate on the 7th attempt. And I will never forget that. That is the most value I ever get from any colleague. Because my brain went, all right, 7 times. I will try 7 times. Yeah. If she had not said that, I might have given up after 1 or 2. But I thought, oh, now it's my 3rd time. I still have 4 ahead of me. And it actually totally shifts your mindset about failure, right? Because it becomes normal and just something we need to deal with. That's it. And I do hope you have lots of questions because I'm very keen to have a lively discussion. And if you show me your faces, that makes me extra happy.
Thank you so much, Sarah. And I'd just like to connect what you've just shared with what I said earlier. In a sense, it's like what you've said is there's emotions in this world that we have, and there's a big roller coaster of them, and you've reflected on them, you've labeled them, and you've got strategies for dealing with them and continuing on with what is important to you, which you have said is doing what you perceive as valuable and enjoyable work. So it might be different language, but I think we were saying very similar things. So thank you so much. Annika, I'd like to introduce my PhD student, Annika, who
Hello.
is going to share back some thoughts and questions. So over to you, Annika. We can't see you, but hopefully you'll pop up when you start talking.
Okay. My
Keep
camera's
talking.
turned on. Okay.
Oh, yes. There we are. We can see you now. We
Can
can see
you
you.
see
So
me?
continue
Okay,
on.
Yeah, so first of all, I wanted to share some of the chat comments as well on your question that you had on your first slide. So what are unhelpful or helpful things to do? So we talked about quite a lot of them already, but yeah, people also said that there's the emotional side of things. They get frustrated, they feel too much, they swear, they cry, they get angry, they question their self-worth, take things personal even though they know that they shouldn't take it personal, or you start questioning your project, or start putting effort into other projects and procrastinate. But people shared more than double of the comments were tips on what to do, actually. So that's encouraging. So just as you mentioned, Sharon, people mentioned that they search for social support from their colleagues, they ask for feedback, they try to reflect on what went right or wrong and try to like take a more rational perspective on things, like take a step back and try and look at maybe also rational reflection on things, like Sarah mentioned, like what's actually in my responsibility and what's more bad luck. So for example, what's the success rate of a journal? Maybe like it's not that unlikely actually to get rejected. And also think that the principle of reviewers concern and remember that there is a common value of getting these reviews. And in general, a lot of people said that they try to first take a step back and try to think of something else, go for a walk, just get your mind somewhere else to get distracted. And also,
thanks, Annika. Yeah, I was going to say, let's go to finish your last thought, and then let's go to some questions. No, these are great tips. Thank you.
So one of the questions was like, when should I keep going, or when should I let my project go? Like, there have been quite a few rejections already. Does that mean that my project is bad, or where's the point where I say, okay, I just keep going with something else, or I keep trying?
Sarah, you go for it.
Yeah, well, I think that's your realm of responsibility. So if I think back of all my grant applications, some of them I won, and I couldn't believe I got them because they were actually really poor applications. And some of them were absolutely brilliant, and I just couldn't. But now, for example, there's a few floating around currently, and one I just don't think is good enough. So, you kind of, because the ARC conveniently takes a year to make a decision, and that gives you a lot of reflection time, right? So they reject it, and you look at it again because you think, should I resubmit? And you think, do you know what? If I would be the reviewer, I wouldn't get all that enthusiastic about it. So I do think you need to take that responsibility. What certainly doesn't work is just chucking it in again, because it is not a lottery, right? There is luck. Of course there is luck, but it's not 100% luck. So putting a poor application in just damages your reputation. You really need to ask yourself, was that maybe just not suitable? Or sometimes it is strategy. I'm not a big believer in strategy, but I have suicide at some times with strategy. So for example, I remember I sent to a journal and I used the keyword climate change because I felt my work was in sustainability and carbon emissions. Well, that's a whole different group of people. And when I looked into what the climate change people do, that is totally different. And they were totally confused with my paper, right? So yeah, sure, sometimes there's little things, but largely you need to just really assess, do you think, would you fund it? If you would be asked to be the reviewer, would you fund that project, yes or no? And if the answer is no, just drop it and move on. Do you know what? You haven't wasted time. Every grant you wrote, you've learned so much that even if you drop it, you have not wasted time. You've built connections, you've read more papers. It's never a waste of time.
Thank you, Sarah. And maybe what I would just add to that is, when you are contemplating whether to give up or not, first of all, I tend to have a bit of a 3 times rule, as in I'll try sort of the similar, I'll always try and improve it a little bit, but I'll try it 3 times. And then if it's been rejected, then it might need a bit more radical overhaul. So I tend to have a bit of a 3 times rule. But I think one of the important things about when do you let go, when do you keep going, is also looking at why you are letting go. Because I think if you are letting go and quitting from a position of that emotion of anger or shame or fear, that is not a good basis for letting go. If you're letting go from a point of rationality, as in, wow, I've tried this paper 5 times, look, it really isn't up to scratch, I really need to change it or let go or try something different, that's a completely different decision-making point than I'm giving up because I don't want to experience those negative emotions again. So I think it's a little bit about letting go from a thoughtful place, not just an emotional place. Back to you, Annika.
Thank you so much for your insights on that. There were also questions regarding on how to create a culture of care in such a competitive environment. How can we support each other, especially when we got accepted for something but our colleague didn't, or the other way around?
Oh, I have to jump in here because I'm married to another academic. And I can tell you that's a whole new level of challenge. If both of you put in a discovery grant and one gets it and the other one doesn't, like whole different level of managing emotions. Yeah. Sorry. No, but in terms of the caring environment, just a quick comment. So I have a little research group, right? And I really try to be very clear with them. I say, you need to understand the reality of the environment you work in, which is not a nice reality. I think we've really lost the plot as an academic community globally. But you need to survive in this business. You've got to acknowledge the reality. But never, ever do you give in to that reality, right? If you want to be happy for 40 years doing what you're doing, you need to separate what you need to do to keep the job, to get the promotion, from why you're doing this. And if ever you give that, if you don't separate that and you just go for the KPIs, I couldn't be happy. I'd quit, right? Because I'm not in this for a board game. I'm in this because I want to do the stuff that excites me. So my caring environment is that I celebrate great ideas, right? And I encourage great ideas, and that's what we are about. And then the grants and the papers come or don't come, but it's a side effect. We never, in fact, I was recently interviewed by 2 students and they asked me, why are you doing what are you doing? And then they said, we know you want to publish in the top journals. And I said, not at all. That is totally not my goal function. I do what I do. And then I send it to a good journal. And whether they take it or not is a whole different story. But I do not do the research I do because I target a specific journal. Actually, really early on in the chat, someone asked, I can't get my coolest work in the good journals. Neither can I. My coolest ideas go in very low ranked journals because the good journals are now populist. They're maximizing citation, they're risk averse. So you're not alone. I also do the same. I send my most revolutionary stuff to weak journals because they still have the courage to publish them.
And book chapters could be another forum for those papers that no one else loves as much as you. But you know, again, I'm a bit the same. Sometimes people really cite my book chapters, and it's because you can sort of publish what you like in a book chapter, and it's quite liberating. So that's another strategy. So yeah, I think this culture of care is really important, and I love what you're saying, Sarah, about pushback on some of it. I again sort of just try to adopt a pragmatic approach to this stuff because you got to survive. So you have to pay some attention to these things. But again, it's this little bit of thing about not getting so caught up in it that your worth is defined by the journals you're published in and stuff. And actually, I see this a lot with junior American colleagues, because our American colleagues often exist in a much more brutal and competitive world, even than us. And so what you see is a lot of game playing to get through to tenure, right? So a lot of only publishing in the best journals, publishing on topics they might not even particularly like, but they're doing it because it gets them ahead, etc. But then what I see is that when those guys get tenure, they often quit because it's not the internal motivation that's been driving them. It's the game playing to, you know, so, and I think what I'm hearing you saying, Sarah, and I would agree with, is you've got to try and hang on to what is actually really important to you and what you believe and what you value. And that's hard in the brutal context that we live in, but that is actually what sustains you in the end. So keep focused on what is important to you and what do you value about the work that you're doing, because that's what keeps you going.
Thank you so much for sharing that, Sarah and Sharon. Maybe we can do one last question. So
just one more. Oh gosh, I love love the questions. I'm trying to type an answer and type an answer.
So yeah, there was a question related to equity. So how do you best manage the situation with a rejection when there's an equity issue involved in the decision, which has led to rejection? Sarah, you want to go first?
Yeah,
sure.
Okay. So I got a rejection on a DP last year, and one of the reviewers said, it just so happened we were all female, right? I didn't engineer it. It just happened that all the CIs were female. And the reviewer's comment was, the research team could do with a bit of a male perspective. I couldn't believe it. And then I went to the ARC. Well, actually, I asked the uni, I said, there are certain reasons you can object. And they said, this is a reason to object. And the ARC overruled me, which was quite interesting because then I developed the theory that it must have been a woman who said that. Anyway, it was very interesting. But what I want to say to the topic is, who cares, right? The bottom line is, I don't have the energy or the interest to go fighting. If I fight for these things, I only fight for my students or for my postdocs. For my life, I only have 24 hours in a day. And I'm not going to dedicate any hour, dealing with some system, right? I will just continue moving on. So I think for me, all these things are kind of in the potential paranoia area and in the uncontrollable area. So putting my emotional energy is a waste of my emotional energy. I'd rather invest it elsewhere.
Okay, thank you. And I'll just offer a slightly different perspective. So when I shared with you, I got rejected with the COE, or we got rejected. And what I was upset about was that of the 11 successful centres, I believe 10 were led by men. This upset me a lot from a point of equity. I tried, and I did actually write to the ARC and voice my discontent. So I did fight, actually, and I had the chief of the ARC call me up and talk to me, and that was, for me, a win, because all I wanted to be was be heard. I think what I would advise is, when you fight these things, when they are very important to you, and when you are fighting them from a point of thoughtfulness. So it goes back to my earlier comment. I sat on those feelings for quite a long time, and wrote the letter in a very evidence-based and calm way. It wasn't an angry rant. It was a thoughtful, and that's why I think it got listened to. I'm not sure it's changed anything, but at least I got, the head of ARC, I got the chance to talk to. So sometimes I do think you fight, but you need to do it not from that emotion place again.
Yeah.
You need to do it from the place of thoughtfulness. And is this a battle I want to take on? Is this important to me? It comes back to doing it from a place of what matters to you. And I decided in this case it mattered to me enough to do that. And
And I think, Sharon, we're not so far apart, because when I fight these things, and I also lodged a complaint, I actually don't do it for me. I look at my female postdocs and students, and I'm thinking, I don't want it to happen to them. That's actually most of the time the motivation when I actually object to these kind of things, because it's about the long term. It's about the next generation. Sharon and I, we grew up in a time where we're used to this, right? Even today, we experience these things, but I don't want my PhD students to experience it.
I think that's a beautiful note to end on. We literally have 1 minute. Thank you, Annika, for your amazing synthesis of many comments and question asking. Thank you, Sarah, as usual, for your wonderful enthusiasm and insights. We love having you on. And most of all, and thank you to the people behind the scenes, Isabel, Eleanor, but most of all, thank you to the many, many people, more than 100, who came on board. This would be nothing without you. Loving seeing your comments, seeing you here. So thank you so much. I think our next one's on promotion. So sign up, and super look forward to seeing you all on our next Women in Research. Thank you, guys.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye, everyone.